Well, Pamela, thank you so much for joining me today.
So happy to be here. It's been a long time coming, girl.
I know it really has. I think we were just thinking about it was 2021 that we were talking about having you on the podcast. And then let's tell our friends what happened.
Literally, you and I were planning, and all of a sudden, I started to get this ache in my ear, and it developed into shingles inside of the auditive nerve. Like, what the hell? And my whole face was affected. Like, before I knew it, it was like I had vertigo. I couldn't walk. It was like I was massively drunk. My face was half paralyzed. I had Bell's palsy, and I couldn't hear because I had like this tinnitus. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. I was supposed to be doing a podcast, and now I can't move. But fortunately,
I know we're about this, but that was wild.
that was, and what's interesting, it was caused by stress. Like it was caused by stress. And it was like, I always see how universe has you look at what's happening in your life as indications. And for me, that really was like, look, you can be all the sober you want, but if you're not managing your stress and your self-care and all the other ways that my life just kind of, escaped from me. And so, universe did what universe does. Like, all right, you won't listen and do it on your own. I'm going to sit your ass down.
Wow,
and
that
have you
was
dive
intense.
again into a process of healing, which is what my life is all about. And now I'm grateful to be here because I am back.
I'm so grateful for your story. I mean, that was quite a journey that you went on, and it was so nice to see you in Chicago back in September.
I know.
You
It was
looked
great.
no different. You looked no different. Like I remember right after you had it done, and the Bell's palsy, where half your face was paralyzed. I don't remember where I saw you. I did see you somewhere, but when I saw you in Chicago, you look fine. I never would have known anything had happened. Like, what a relief. And I think after hearing your story, a shingles shot.
Yeah, I think a shingle shot is just a no-brainer for anyone over 50. And it's just the thing, it's after 50, and I was like 46 when this happened. And so it never would have occurred to me. But yes, for your listeners over 50, go get a shingles vaccine. And, just in general, PSA, please manage your stress, especially if you're a woman, and don't realize that you're giving yourself out to everyone except to yourself. So little PSA.
Wow. A little PSA. Well, I'm so glad that you're all healed up, and
Thank you. Thank you, babe.
We'll take that all as a lesson to take better care of our health. It's so funny, those of us that are in like these helping professions, it's so easy to like give and give and give, and we hit the brick wall every once in a while. Like, it happens,
Isn't that crazy?
So
I hear my voice telling my clients, I do coaching for recovery in many aspects, and I hear myself telling them the stuff that I have a hard time applying. It's like, you're laughing, so you're like, I know what you mean.
Listen, I teach a self-esteem class. Reason. We teach what we need to learn, as they say.
Absolutely. That's one of my favorite phrases. But I'm very intentional about that at this moment, because I know the impact, But anyway, it's great to see you. It's great to see you there. I turned around. You're sitting beside Elizabeth Gilbert, and the table right beside me. You're doing this funny thing where you just did this, like you licked her face.
I did.
It's like,
so man, that was the night of my life. That was wild.
Oh, I bet. That was wild. And then I heard, of course, cool. the gorgeous podcast that you had with her, and I thought, how precious that we got to hear more of her and of you in that beautiful conversation. So that was wonderful.
Yay! That was super fun. Well, listen, let's start with this little game that I like to play called the lightning round. And it's just to front load the episode with some resources. But when you think back to when you first got sober, is there a book that really helped you in the beginning?
Oh, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Amen, sister.
It was 2009. And honestly, there wasn't a lot of Quitlet at the time. Or if there was, I certainly wasn't aware of it. It was not anywhere in social media, these recovery, authors and rock stars that there are out there today. So no, I didn't really have any resources other than going to the beautiful rooms of 12-step work to get my information, inspiration, and a path of action. Boom.
Yeah, I mean, listen, same. I got sober a long time ago too, and there really was nothing. There was nothing else. But I'm kind of, in a
Yeah,
way,
yeah,
I wonder if you feel the same way. Like I was kind of glad that there was nothing else because I love the process of the 12 steps and the community and all
yeah,
that. And now, but now there's so many different kinds of programs and offshoots and programs specializing just for women.
yeah,
I may have been tempted to just go that route and I would have missed the whole 12 step experience. Do you think you would have gone
yeah.
12 steps if you got sober now, or do you think you probably might have tried something different?
So I actually have a cool story because I got sober twice, one in that kind of prehistoric rock age, and then again in 2016, 17, give or take, or 17 actually. So if you don't mind, I'll tell you a little bit about it.
Please
So
go
in
ahead.
2009, thank you. In 2009, I got sober. I was 35. I grew up in Mexico to a Mexican dad and a French mom. And so, the whole thing with red wine and tequila, genetically, I was wired for it. Culturally, I started, like in my culture, people just drink openly at a very early age. Like we
Right.
roll our eyes at American, 21 years of age. And now I know neurobiologically is really not ideal to start drinking that young into, before brain formation. So there's a little predisposition there. But anyway, so
Yeah.
by age, I had a weird scenario. I don't know if you've ever heard me tell the story, but at age 20, I had a very traumatic event happen in my life. I was kidnapped. And so my whole world became like a Hollywood script. I love your face. You're like,
I'm like,
that's
oh my
kind of normal.
God, kidnapped at
Yeah.
20. Wait, were you
Kidnapped
in,
at 20 in
where in
Mexico.
Mexico? What part of
Well,
Mexico were
I
you in?
my family and I lived in Cuernavaca, which is a city to about an hour of Mexico City towards the south, towards Acapulco. But truly, this happened in a lake house. I grew up in a very beautiful family, and I admit there was a lot of privilege around me. And my dad had like a weekend house, and we had, that scenario going on, and they targeted the house. It was a gorgeous house. I mean, it was the kind of house that just called the attention of people, and they just targeted it, and they cut the electricity wires. And so we were in a pitch black night, April of 1995. And as it turns out, the people that kidnapped me were not out to harm me. They just wanted the ransom. It was a very powerlessness situation at the time because it was government related. It was like the federales, like the police. So you feel, of course, a lot of trauma because there's, it's just a basic need of your freedom that gets violated. So, need or right. And so, anyway, when I was given back safely, fortunately, quite traumatized, but safe on the outside, we moved to the US very quickly. And so here I am at 20 years old, living in the US by myself. My family quickly went back to Mexico because they had a life to live and didn't want the kidnappers to really steal that, life that they had built. But I stayed here. And instead of going to therapy, I very quickly started to medicate with wine. And so what became part of, like I guess the solution for a long time, it worked. It was part of my identity. I thought, well, I mean, it's normal that I drink like this because I'm French Mexican, but really from the very beginning, I was literally just tapping out, from all of the trauma. And it's so important. Like now we know mental health needs to be treated as such, but at the time it was like, puff up your boobs and just kind of move forward. That was kind of like the thing, right? And so, and Latin culture, because you don't want to be la loca or like the crazy one. So that was kind of what I did. I just became more and more of a drinker, more and more trapped in the addiction, had no idea what it was. And flash forward to 35, I have the privilege of being a single mom here, raising my kid on my own. Have a really good job as a video producer. My life on the outside looks great, but inside I was now highly dependent on wine. And so I'm drinking, a bottle of wine a night, on a, regular Monday, Tuesday, 2 bottles if it's getting towards the weekend, and doing fine on the outside. I mean, at home, raising my son. And so at age 35, I had like the night that changed everything, because I drove he and I to a mommy and son date. And on the way back, I drove him drunk, and I say it and I still feel the shame, but I've had to get over that and just say that was the moment when I realized something was not okay. Because for me to do that with my son, I mean, just like any parents can understand how terrible that was. And at the time, we got home and he just looked at me with his beautiful brown eyes and said, "Mom, I was really scared." And then he blamed himself. He said, "I really wish that I had called your friend to drive us." And Arlena, I mean, my heart broke that night. I mean, I literally remember just feeling like I put him to bed, and I had that moment on the bathroom floor that so many people talk about, where you're like, I hate myself. Like, I hated myself because I didn't understand what was happening. I thought I was the shittiest human being in the world. I had no idea what addiction was, no idea that it was operating in me. And so the next day I did the only thing that I knew to do, which was go to a 12-step room, thinking I wasn't like them. And thinking I was just going to learn to drink. I was like, I'm going to tame this, this monster. But yeah, so at the time, just like you say, it was such a simple and pure process that I went through. And I love the fact that, just like you said, that it was exactly what I needed. I was so full of lack of information, of lack of understanding, of lack of, what comes next? How can I take the next baby step? So, very grateful to have done it like that. 5 years. I got sober for 5 years. It was very,
Just doing like
very
meetings
beautiful.
and steps and all that.
Absolutely. And I
Yeah.
was I got a gold star in that program, and I was desperate for my sponsor's approval. So it was like I didn't know it, but I had a very codependent relationship with the fellowship and the program and my sponsor. Like I was doing it more to please her than anything else. And while, of course, my life was lovely because I wasn't hungover or jonesing for a drink, I never actually addressed. There's this thing that we say, like, outside issues are outside issues. And I took that in a weird context, and I never understood all of the healing that needed to be done, for the trauma, for the codependency, so I put down the wine, but I picked up toxic relationships. So I went through several, guy after guy after guy, and I was reaching out to them to kind of give me the same sense of who I was that I used to get with wine. And I can explain it with words now because I have the language and the understanding, but I didn't know. So that sobriety, kind of always looking for something outside, was also really difficult. So I lost it. I did what any normal do, which is to say, bullshit, I can't do this. I lost it. I got married for the second time. My husband was also sober, and he wasn't doing any program or meeting or anything. So he was like, you've got this down. You've got 5 years sober. You should spend more time with me and my kids and da da da. And so I was like, that sounds like a really good idea.
Oh no. We all know where that goes.
Yeah, exactly. So within, I don't know, but like a couple of months, I found myself just wrapped up in all of my resentments,
Yeah.
with no community, because I literally, dropped everything. And
Right.
for a second, because like I said, I was highly codependent with my sponsor. I felt like I could breathe. But yeah, I got disconnected from everything. And so, yeah, I found myself in the parking lot of a CVS, really classy, drinking little plastic baby bottles of warm Chardonnay. Because if you're
Yeah.
gonna, lose your sobriety, it really should be with
It's
warm
gotta be,
Chardonnay, I tell
yeah,
you.
it's gotta be over shitty booze.
Shitty boost, yeah.
Yeah.
So that started a really interesting part of my story, because I don't believe that every, sobriety journey needs a relapse. Obviously, you've been 30 something years, right, on the journey.
Mhm.
Isn't that,
Mhm.
don't you have like 30 something years?
Just 30. Yeah. But it was on
30,
the
yeah. I mean,
23rd. It was on the 23rd. So I'm
oh,
deep into 31.
amazing. Amazing. Yeah, there you go. There you go. I remember I was like, oh my God, this is so again, I know that it doesn't happen for everyone, but if it does happen, relapse, I always say, dude, it's part of the journey for those of us who happens, because the truth is we keep thinking that it's failure. And for me, it certainly wasn't. It is literally
No.
going back into that horrible, and not romancing it. It was horrible 2 years that allowed me to
Yeah.
start a completely new kind of sobriety and relationship to myself, which is the second part of the story. But I'm going to be quiet because it's a good Latina. I will just, go and I'll let you get a word in.
No, no, I love it. I love it. I was just telling you before that I'm half Mexican. My mother was born and raised in Mexico City. So,
I know.
this feels very
Awesome. That's
familiar,
awesome.
very, very
Yeah.
close to my
Yeah.
heart.
Yeah.
No,
Well,
but
I was born in
I
Mexico
was,
City, so yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. But I was curious, when you got sober the first time and you drove drunk with your son and you had that, like the next day, like I had the next day too, like that morning where it's like, I
Mhm.
cannot do this again type of feeling.
Yeah.
How did you go to your first meeting by yourself? Did you look it up in the yellow
Mhm.
pages? And how did that happen for
You
you?
know, I had a girlfriend who was the first time that she and I kind of met and decided to go grab dinner, and we knew we were going to be close friends. She drank so much that night that she passed out on my couch and I couldn't get her up. And so
Wow.
I later learned that that girlfriend had gone to a 12-step meeting and changed her life. And so I randomly also remember calling her once when I was drunk saying, oh, hey, since you're sober, would you mind bringing me a bottle of wine? And the sweet girl actually did. And then I had to make
Wow.
amends because I know. So during that stage that we're talking about, she immediately came to mind as maybe I should call my girlfriend. And I did, and she was awesome. She bought me a big book and she said, I'll pick you up. And she took me to my first meeting. So I'm very grateful because she was the one that kind of held my hand through the very early stages where honestly I was terrified. We're just so full of stigma of thinking I'm going to end up in one of those places.
I
And
know.
those places were, people just like me.
I know.
Yeah.
I remember I was so scared to go to my first one that somebody had invited me to go because I had been sharing I
Yeah.
was having problems. And we went to a meeting that was like 45 minutes away from where I lived because I
Oh,
was terrified I was going to run into somebody that I knew,
yes.
not
Yeah.
connecting the dots that if they were at a
Right.
meeting, they were there for the same thing.
You're like, Lord forbid they see me there.
I know. It's like, they're like,
I can see them
they're there
too.
for the,
Right.
they're,
Right.
they're
Right.
there for the
Exactly.
same
Yeah.
reason. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you stay doing that long drive for a long time, or
No.
did you actually like drop that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I actually did my period of relapsing. So I had a really bad night, and then I did 2 years of trying to moderate. And then I got
Mm,
to a 12-step meeting, and then it took me like 60 days to get 30 because I smoked weed again. Like weed was my big
mhm.
thing. Like I had quit
Okay.
drinking in November, but was smoking weed until March. And then at the end of
Yeah.
March, I smoked weed again. So I reset my date, which is why it's
Right.
the end of April. So
Right.
it
Right.
wasn't clean. It wasn't like I've heard people that are like, oh no,
Yeah.
I decided to quit drinking and I've been sober ever since. I'm like I stumbled in the beginning. Yeah. But then I'm
Those
okay.
people are a mystery to me. Yeah.
I
And I
know.
mean, I have a lot of clients right now when I start working with people, there are so many questions that are related to what if I drink, and I'm like, I it's almost like an expectation that it's going to happen. It's
Mm.
like if you go to a nutritionist to get your nutrition in order, that doesn't mean that you're immediately going to be the broccoli queen, or the protein, you know, it's a process,
It's a
you need to
process
get
for
all
sure.
Yeah. So I think what I love the most about having had the relapse for so long, babe, is that I get to access a different part of sobriety that I didn't before, and part of the process that has to do with shame. Like during those
Mm-hmm.
5 years going to the rooms of AA, which again, I absolutely love. I just want to be very clear. The 12-step work is still at the core today. What I
Mm-hmm.
always send, as like the first recommendation for people to try, what has continued to change my life. I recently, well, about a year ago, I finished the 12 steps for codependency. I just
Ah,
absolutely love the program. But I
yeah.
do recognize that coming back from that relapse was really hard because in those 5 years of sobriety, I never really heard about concepts that I desperately needed to bring into my life, like
Mm-hmm.
what is codependency, trauma, taking ownership of your healing, of course, shame, the shame piece, the shame that is associated with relapsing. The shame is really what kept me stuck for 2 years,
Yeah.
and it required another girlfriend in the 12-step world who had relapsed multiple times, who came back and said, all right, we're not going to do this shit any longer. Like you're going to walk into that meeting tits up, full of empowerment and no shame. Like,
Yeah.
don't let anyone put shame on you, and don't feel shame. And it was weird because even just that little line, I was like, you're right. Like this is in my head. I get to drop it so that I can give myself another chance, because it was that pain that kept me, going back to the bottle. So
That's
these
brutal.
days I love that the second stage of sobriety was really inclusive of an ownership of my healing, like the codependency, the trauma, all the stuff for which I drank in the first place, but
Right.
actively looking at shame as one of the things that I constantly needed to keep at bay, have conversations about, bring out to the light. Let's shine a little light on it because I'm feeling
Yeah.
it. So, it dissolves. Reading a lot of
Yeah.
Brene Brown, who talks
Yeah.
about shame and vulnerability, and making it a new way of entering sobriety and feeling kind of like a badass as a
Yeah.
sober human, and not a secretive
Yeah.
and shamey one like I did before in the first stage, you know?
What did you do? Did you seek professional help to deal with your trauma of being kidnapped?
That is actually a beautiful question because it's ongoing. I
Yeah.
don't know that one single body of work has been sufficient for me. And I'm going to tell you why. I have been seeking help in the therapist space with my lovely white fellows. And I need to go back to women that understand my country a little bit better. And so
Okay.
that's where I am right now, really diving into this beautiful new space where I'm reclaiming my roots, not just as a Latina that is driving certain efforts of anti-racism, of Latina inclusivity, of, brown folks in the recovery space and how to make it more inclusive, and leading the She Recovers in Espanol and all of that fun stuff, but also for my own healing.
Yeah.
I have been really grateful to live in a very assimilated way, because it has allowed me to really just, grow my wings in this country. But a piece has been missing for me. And now I'm seeking a lot of connection with therapists and healers that look at the way that I went through it in a multicultural context that allows me to, dive deeper into the healing. So it's ongoing. But
Mhm.
yes, I do believe that part of my new sobriety has been taking charge of my own journey of healing and integrating, whatever I needed to integrate, for all of the aspects that were still alive and well in my
Yeah.
sobriety
Yeah.
of the first
Listen,
stage.
I feel like that trauma does something to hardwire our nervous system, right?
Yeah,
Like it triggers your
yeah,
fear response and like
mm,
on a
mm,
neurological level.
yeah,
And I have found things, specific modalities like EMDR and somatic
yeah,
practices to be helpful. Have you
yeah.
tried those, or any of those been
So,
useful to you?
no. Yes and no. The EMDR is like literally one of the things that I have as my little, like, that's where I want to find a good
Oh,
practitioner,
good.
for sure. embodiment and somatic practices are definitely at the core of what I'm doing
Okay.
now. This whole Nikki Myers, the issues are in the tissues and everything,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Peyton Kennedy, who is a gorgeous coach who leads also a lot of the movement with She Recovers. I recently had the privilege of co-facilitating a retreat with her, and
Oh,
she's an
nice.
embodiment coach. She does a
Yeah.
lot of dancing and movement, and it's not just the somatic practices, but truly diving deeper and understanding that nervous system activation
Yeah.
that I still very much feel is part of my everyday life. You know, as a
Yeah.
parent, for example, I've recognized limiting beliefs that came out of that experience that unconsciously I operate through with my son. Like my son
Yeah.
is, I mean, like the center of my life.
Mm.
I adore him. He's now 23. And sometimes I find myself operating out of the same fear that I experienced, that my parents must have felt, and that I experienced in the kidnapping. And so I'm now aware of it. I don't know that I have yet like that place of where I can say I've managed or I heal it, but at least I can see it. Like
Yeah. That's
if I call
huge.
him or text him, yeah. And I don't get like a response in a certain time. I now have practices to recognize that my body starts to get activated because there's a
Yeah.
little narrative, a little wiring in my head that takes me back to the worst case scenario, which makes no sense. But I have
Yeah.
that. And it's mine to own and to tenderly love. Like I can't
Yeah.
judge myself for it, but to also say, oh, look, this is something I need to work, and then bring practices to detonate that feeling that starts to happen in my body. So it's, you know, so the EMDR is part of the modalities that I want to bring into. You've done it, babe?
Oh,
You've
yeah.
actually
Yeah.
gone through it?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
I had some childhood sexual abuse. And so I've done a
Mhm.
couple of different things. I did EMDR, which was hugely helpful. And I also did hypnosis. And it had such
Mhm.
a profound effect because it's like rewiring your subconscious,
Yeah.
limiting beliefs,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
reframing those experiences so that, um, it's so interesting how your like your need for safety and the fear response of things that
Yeah.
happened so long ago affect you today,
Mm. And that's the
right?
thing, your brain can't recognize if it's happening now or in the past. And so the minute that the
Yeah.
thought lands, whether it's consciously or
Yeah.
unconsciously, my whole body starts to react as if it were happening.
Yeah.
And you know, we go back to the first thing that you and I were talking about. I know for a fact that the stress that made my body, the feminine side, also the left side, you know, is the being, not the doing. My masculine side was always taking over, and my feminine side, which is that whole,
Yeah.
you know, tenderness, compassion, self care, all the things we give to others, but not to ourselves. If
Right.
I'd known to recognize the way that my body was throwing signals of stress and activation at me, at the
Right.
time, I don't think I would have gotten to a place where my body, you know, detonated that sickness. And so now that's kind of like, oh, look. I mean, it's this beautiful process of evolution and ownership of my own path, because
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to hear that you had that be part of your childhood. But yeah, we drag those things until we heal them, you know, or
Yeah.
ask for
And I
help.
think the nice thing about, I mean, the gift of therapy is that we learn that like for me, I recognize that I am sensitive to certain things. Like it makes me uniquely
Mhm.
qualified to recognize certain
Mhm.
things. Like I can see it because I've
Mm.
been there.
Mm.
So, turned into
Yeah,
like a superpower. You know what I mean? Like I leverage
I
that
love
to be
that.
useful to others. And so
Right,
I don't
right.
regret it now. Like I'm not sorry it
Sure,
happened anymore. And I'm also not
that's
as
wonderful.
triggered by it. And if I do get triggered, there are things I can do to regulate. And I was going to ask you, when you have those experiences where you feel like you're being triggered and your brain, you get afraid and your brain goes offline, what are some things that you do to sort of help you get grounded and certain back feeling peaceful again?
I think the first thing is I ask myself what's really happening. Like I've learned there's this beautiful, beautiful body of work, IFS, internal family
Oh,
systems. Um,
yes.
yeah,
You
I know. It's
love
like,
it.
oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I mean, some of your listeners are going to be like, yep, yep, yep. And some are going to be like, what does that even mean? I
What
mean,
is
I
that?
don't, I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to say it in a, totally accurate way, but it basically just it's Richard Schwartz who came up with this modality. It's gorgeous. It basically states that we all have different parts of ourselves that kind of get stuck in time and are continuing to come up and kind of take front and center at certain moments of our life until we don't actually look at them, reparent them into a place of wholeness. And while their objective is to protect us from certain things, they also keep us stuck. I mean, your gorgeous guest Elizabeth Gilbert talks about her fear and
Yeah.
how her fear would drive the car. And at some point, she learned to recognize that part of herself, and love that part of herself and say,
Yeah.
that's cool, but you're driving now. You're not driving. You're in the back seat. You're not even driving, right beside me. You're not picking the radio stations or the snack at the gas station. Like, you're here. You're part of me. And so I've had to kind of look at myself like, okay, I'm 20 years old. I was kidnapped, completely uprooted from everything, completely traumatized, left on my own, left to my own devices. Of course, there is a part of me that is still going. And so when I start to feel like that, the first thing is I just go into a place where I get to put my hand on my heart and breathe and observe. And then I talk to that part. I talk to myself. I'm like, you're okay, babe. I know what you're going through. It's okay. I'm here to take care of us. Like, I literally just engage with myself
Yeah.
in a dialogue. And I've recognized different parts of myself. Like, there's a 5-year-old that got stuck in a bathroom by a little classmate on a play date. And I was literally locked in the bathroom. And I think I was there for 2 hours until my mom arrived to pick me up.
God.
And what's funny is I didn't tie that together with the current claustrophobia that stops me from going into elevators. So I'm like a 49-year-old woman. I don't even know how old I am. It's awesome. But you walk me into a place where there's an elevator and I become a 5-year-old. I'm like, I don't want to, and it's been so
Yeah.
limiting in my adult life.
Yeah.
And now I get to be like, oh, it's that 5-year-old in me that is
Yeah.
getting activated. So I have to, the tools to kind of go back to your question is I observe, I get clear on what's happening. I bathe myself with love and compassion and tenderness the way that I would a 5-year-old or a 20-year-old who's in crisis.
Yeah.
And then I switch the channel. And switching the channel, that's where it gets really juicy for me because I get to either, go and take a walk or maybe move my body. I have a
Oh, yeah.
playlist of stuff that gets my heart kind of happy. And of course, it's
Mhm.
Latin music. Of
Yeah. Yeah.
course,
Yeah.
it's
Of
reggaeton,
course.
and Shakira. Um, if I'm really stuck and none of that is available, I will call my codependency sponsor who's become, part of my life. I have a coach, Elizabeth, who I met in 2017 when I went to She Recovers. The first She Recovers, I was only 2 months sober and I connected with her. And she's like literally the source of my wisdom when I can't access my own. And of course, my relationship with my higher power, who is God, um, is at the core of it all, whether it's prayer, meditation, journaling, two-way
Yeah.
letter, two-way prayer. And there's a million little tools,
Yeah.
tricks in the hat that are available to me.
Restrictive. Just discovered the two-way prayer recently, like within the last 3 weeks, month or so. There's one
Mm.
that is on the artist way, where so it's a
Mm-hmm.
meeting. They read a little something in the beginning, and then you write for 10 minutes, and then break into little groups. And this particular one talks about the artist way book, like they'll read a passage out of it. And it is, and people offer feedback to each other. It has been magical. I
That's awesome.
just learned about it. Apparently it's been around for a really long time, but there are a lot
Yeah,
of
I
tools
think, I mean, and
available.
honestly, there are a lot, but there's a lot of versions of the two-way prayer, and that's what's
Yeah.
also beautiful. There's, like in the 12-step world, the two-way prayer is the way that it was explained to me was in the first part of the letter, it's you putting out all of your feeling, and normally obviously we're processing a hard feeling to your
Uh-huh.
higher power. And so it's very unfiltered.
Mm.
It's like, dear universe, dear energy, dear source, in my case, dear God. And I'm like, no one's going to read it. So I don't care about grammar or structure. I just want to vomit everything that is keeping me stuck in fear, resentment, whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
And then this is where it gets really, really cool. The second part is, God or my higher power talking back to me.
Mhm.
And this is where my ego will be like, oh, it's you writing, and that's what it's a practice. And you're
I'm
like, no,
glad you
okay, but
said that
what
though,
if,
because everybody thinks that. It's like, this is, I'm
right,
doing
but what
this.
if I get curious and I continue showing up, and I get willing to let go of that shit and see what happens? And the practice has been great because sometimes God will be like, do nothing. And I'm like, okay. And that's the instruction.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's nothing. And sometimes, Arlena, I am literally brought to tears with the clarity and beauty and stuff I can't even see at all by myself. So I know for a fact, that's why it's called a spiritual practice,
Yeah.
that there's something bigger than myself driving all of the process. So anyway, so that's the modality that I was referring to, but I know that the whole thing that you're talking about with the artist's way, Elizabeth Gilbert, I keep quoting her, it's
I
obviously
love
girl fan.
her. I know.
She does. Have you seen her Substack, babe? She has like
Oh
the
yeah.
letters to love.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like at the premise, like, right, like what would love say to you if you write
Yeah.
to the fear, which is like the primal thing of that first part of the letter, what would love say back? Or
Yeah.
what would wisdom say back? I think that's a little bit of what I've heard from her, and I'm like, wow, that is a little bit of a twist on the original that I was taught, but who knows which one is the original? They're all,
Who cares? Yeah.
available for us.
Yeah.
Who cares? Exactly.
So
Exactly.
good.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it just gets
Tell me.
juicier and juicier, doesn't it?
That's so good. I love it. Tell me a little bit about the work that you do with women, particularly, when you talked about servicing the Hispanic community, that really piqued my
Mm,
interest because it is important that we address, and because of my heritage, it's like I could just see
mhm,
the need. Like when I went to Mexico City the
yeah,
last time, we were walking down a street and there was an A symbol, and I don't know what it said
mhm.
because I can't read Spanish. But
Servicio, unidad, yeah, exactly.
I knew what
Yeah,
it
it's the same,
was.
but try.
Yeah,
You're
and my aunt was explaining.
like,
Yeah,
"These are my people."
those are my people.
Yeah.
My aunt was explaining that it's like a club, and that
Mhm.
she doesn't know anything about it, but she was like, oh yeah, that's a club where like the young kids go, and who don't want to do drugs and stuff, or drink. And I was like,
Right,
oh, that's awesome.
right.
But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean, I totally understand. I get the need for being able to hear messages that it has through that filter of your heritage.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, 2 things here. Thank you for the beautiful question. For starters, the language is important, as a relatable scenario. So there's so many Latinas who perhaps if they live in the US, they have a functional, level of English, but at the core, having conversations about vulnerability, about shame, about the things that, stop them from understanding, from diving deeper and everything. I mean, if you don't have it in your language, it's almost impossible to really do the deep dive.
Yeah.
So language, of course, barrier is at the core of one of the reasons why, women of color, people of color don't have the privilege to access the resources that, our white folk do. And so
Mhm.
I'm, loving that aspect of it. But also it's not just the language, babe. It's the cultural context See, in Latin communities and Latin families, we operate out of certain values that may not be present if you don't understand them at all. And so, for example, a Latin woman may have ideas of how, of like shame, how it would reflect on her family
The
if
family.
she were to seek mental health. Like
Yeah.
literally, it's so bizarre. Like they will think about how is this going to reflect on my mother and my family and the way that people, the reputation of the family, if I go to therapy or if I show at AA. It's not even about the shame that they would feel, it's about the imposed shame. Like there's that visual of perfection that we have to have. You know, there's like men are allowed historically. I mean, we're still bridging that gap, but in many ways we are behind, you know, women in the US. And so we still have the idea that, you know, men are allowed to do certain things, but women kind of aren't. And so, you know, here's the woman who's going out to, you know, work things, and then she comes back and she's had a couple of glasses of wine or 3 glasses of wine, and you know, here's the guy that gets completely berserk because women are not supposed to drink, or certainly
Yeah.
not like that. And you know, I mean, there's just shame, there's family, there's mental health is still so stigmatized. There's religion as a source of healing. So there's something called Marianismo, which is at the core the relationship that we have with the maternal version, you know, in Catholic
Oh,
yeah, Catholic understanding. It's like the Virgin Mary is our source of, it's our passage into the relationship with Jesus. And of course, we have a very close maternal relationship with her, which is gorgeous. I absolutely love that. However, you know, there are so many of us that are like, okay, go pray and it'll go away. And you're like, it's fucking alcoholism. It's not going to go away. You know?
yeah.
Like, this is not something that I can just say some Hail Marys and have it be gone. And so that's
Yeah.
where I get to really touch cultural chords and walk people through the shame, walk people through things that they may not even have the ability to express. And all of a sudden, when I bring them up, they're like, oh yeah, I feel that. And you're like, all right. So it's like walking them through a curtain, you know, like, come, I got you, I'm holding your hand.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. I mean, it's an effort that I'm just now starting to dive into more actively as I do my own healing.
Yeah.
But I am thrilled about it, because if we need something out there, it is voices that reach all of the beautiful people that are out there, and not just to focus on, you know, what we have working for one small or the majority, but
The
we're not the
majority.
majority, you know. Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
funny because I until you said that about the family, bringing shame to the family, like those were messages that I got from my mom, and n- like never heard it before. I've been sober for
Mm-hmm.
30
Mm-hmm.
years and I've never
Absolutely.
had
Yep.
anybody talk about, yeah, I remember my mom being like, you're bringing shame to the family, is basically like
Yep.
she would disown
Absolutely.
me regularly. Like I had such
Mm-hmm.
difficult relationships with women because of the constant abandonment. Now
Yep.
I get that she didn't know how to handle me, but her solution was, you're bringing the shame to the family, so I'm going to cut you out. I'm gonna cut you off.
Oh, I'm so sorry, babe.
Yeah,
That
that's,
must
I
have been
mean,
painful.
I got sober early, like at 25. So we had a long time we had another, 25 years together to heal that relationship, which was very different at the
Right.
end than at the beginning.
Right.
But I just
Right.
love that you gave voice to that little
Yeah.
nuance about
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
shameful thing because you're reflecting bad
Yeah.
on the family.
Yeah. And it's weird because, you know, there's always the look. It's like, you know, you're telling me about your mom. It's like that's what she learned at home.
Yeah,
The role of women in Mexico. Mexico is a maternal, it's a feminine based, believe it or not, even though machismo is at the core of everything, including our leader. Um, but we still are a maternal, it's a matriarchy, not a patriarchy. The US is a patriarchy. And so over there, the whole maternal thing is at the core of the value system, of the religious system, of the way that we are raised. And with such, women carry the lineage and the legacy and the responsibility to continue to host and give and care and so there's, culturally, we're all so stretched thin because we don't have that, culture of mental health, of, hey, watch yourself, hey, how much are you pouring out into the world versus how much are you, giving from an
Nourishing.
empty
Yeah.
gas tank and you need to refuel it. Exactly. And because our grandmothers, our great grandmothers, our mothers, did it, like they just don't know any better. So that's a little bit of the compassion. Like, look, I'm shedding some light on a process that was true for you. And also, like with my clients, I know I don't have to tell you, but with my clients, a lot of like, that doesn't mean that they didn't love you or they didn't want the best for you. It's just that's all they knew. Like,
Right.
we are the ones changing the conversation.
Yeah.
And we have that responsibility because obviously, these are women, my age and younger that are having, raising women where these conversations need to be having, a light, a normalization that wasn't present just generationally for us. So
It is good to see that
powerful
things
work.
are, it's good to see that things are changing and that there's somebody like you that's available that can help women. I did want
Yeah.
to bring up the work that you do. You have a website called My Badass Recovery, which I love, and a podcast, and you do lots of work. Tell me, and you're doing codependency. Tell me about the help women.
So I'm going to very quickly, just because you said, and it always makes me smile when you said My Badass Recovery, you're like, I love it. It's such a controversial word. When I say My Badass Recovery, and people are like, they either love it or they hate it. They're like, oh, I really dive with
Then
that.
you
Or
know
what
who your
the hell
people
is
are
wrong with
then.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because here's the deal. When you come into sobriety, the last thing that you feel is badass. We're
Right.
just so broken.
Yeah.
And our sense of self, or self-esteem, all of it, like that's literally the last thing that you feel like. But that's where the power lays, like the invitation of how can you redesign your life and address all of the shit, because that's the difference, right? Now in the new sobriety, it wasn't just focused on the not drinking. In fact, there's no focus for me when I
Right.
walk my clients into the work, into the not drinking. Like, we're not fighting our addiction. We're fighting for a transformation. Like, we get to redesign the life. And of course the drinking doesn't fit in. And so it's kind of like a domino effect. But yeah, so My Badass Recovery was a result of that second stage of sobriety. Once She Recovers, in the very first event they had, fell in love with the community, fell in love with the idea of openly healing with other women, met my coach, Elizabeth Coker, who I absolutely owe my life to, because she presented a really cool thing. When I asked her for help, she said, let's get you home. She didn't say, let's get you sober. She said, let's get you home, which really, it set the tone for what I was to do in the next, years, 5 years from there to now. Cause I became a coach,
The 11th
I'm a She
coach.
Recovers coach. The 11th, which is also my favorite number. So it's magic.
Amazing.
So yeah, I am the 11th coach in the She Recovers community, which they have, like, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of coaches now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
very grateful to have been with them from the inception. And then, I grew this platform because at the core, I wanted to have these conversations about sobriety, about shame, about how to deal with the shame, about how to, enter a space of healing the codependency for a lot of women. Well, I want to say women, but I have a lot of male clients who are also really wrapped up in codependency, and they don't even know what it is, and so they're sober, but their marriages are falling apart because they don't know where the other person ends and they begin. And so we have to do a lot of that work. And so I have the courses that walk you through some of the basics, but of course I thrive in doing mentorship, because it is in the mentorship that I get to assess where each person is, where they are in the path and what we have to start peeling through, what limiting beliefs, what, old narratives don't work for their development, and kind of help them grab the pen that writes the life and start redesigning their world. So it's really cool to watch them. And it happens quickly too, which I'm grateful for, that I get to see changes that happen in people's lives. So that's kind of what I do. I have a podcast like you.
Yeah.
Certainly not as popular.
I totally invited myself on. I was like, "Hey, don't you have a podcast? Can I come on?"
Totally. We're doing absolutely. I was already going to ask you. So great minds. But yes, we're in the process of recording. Yeah, but that's a given, girl. I mean, that's a given. We're in the process of recording season 2. Season 1 was just Alyssa, my co-host, who's a badass. She's amazing. She's a life coach. She's incredible. Her deal is not just alcohol and codependency, but also the relationship to food. And so she brings in that piece. And so the first season is really conversations about addiction, stigma, shame, codependency, the God scenario and the spiritual path of action, all that stuff. So it's really cool. It's just conversations between she and I. Nice. But season 2 is with people that are really rocking the recovery arena, from authors, to codependency people, coaches, mentors, and, voices in the space. And so, yes, I would absolutely love to have you.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
I remember meeting Alyssa too. It's been a while, but I remember meeting her too. And you guys, I was like, oh, these two together, unstoppable.
Yes, yeah. She's got the Italian fire. I got the Latina thing, and so. Yeah, she actually flew to Dallas to physically be in the same space for our first season, which was great. Nice. And so we set tent in a loft where my son lives now, but at the time it was like this creative space that I had. And it was so funny, Arlena, because we started to do the episode and we realized that both of us were like alpha males. And we're like, yeah. And at some point she was like, all right, we need to learn to dance. And literally we started to dance together to physically learn to lean on each other and stop fighting the other person's, it was like a dance of egos so that we could soften them. Yeah. And so it's really, I mean, listen, I don't think that I will ever get to a point where I say, so now I know how to do it. So now I've got that figured out. Like, it's just,
I get it.
There's something. Yeah, God, I fucking love life and recovery. It's really badass. Even on the days you don't feel like a badass, it's still badass.
I cannot imagine life without it. I really can't. I'm so glad we don't have to do life.
It sounds like a really trite thing, but yeah. It's
amazing.
I recently left a toxic relationship, and much love to that person. Absolutely, he's magical and he changed my life. But one of the conversations was like, he was always like, you're always talking about sobriety. Don't you get tired? And I'm like, it's kind of my life, because I get to be part of, a process that completely changes. I get to redesign my life every day. Like, I don't have to be married to a story of who I decided I wanted to be yesterday. I can today continue to evolve and elevate and redesign. And I get to be part of people doing that, So, I mean, at least for me, each person has their own jam. There's people that maybe just love talking about chapstick, who knows? But for me, it's, this is the place where I just, this is where God put me. My dad laughs. He's like, I sent you to an all-girl Catholic school and and it wasn't until you found your relationship with God in the bars, or as a result of, I'm like, in the 12-step group. I had to become, a drunk. And I say it with a lot of love. I love my labels. I don't ever expect people to, but I love my labels. I'm like, I'm an alcoholic. Because for me, it gives me clarity. And because I say them with honestly such love and empowerment, for me, it actually makes me feel like a badass. Like, I just don't bring shame into my life. And if anything makes me feel funky, it is, babe. And I know that you're like just like that. So, But again, that doesn't work for everyone. Some people are like, I just don't want to define myself through that. And I totally respect that too. Like each person gets to do their own jam.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Well, listen, I'm going to leave links to everything because, man, I know you have a lot of resources and many ways to help people. What's the best way for people to reach out to you? Do you do like a discovery call? How do you start that conversation?
Absolutely. So if your audience would like to, I also wanted to share the code Arlena.
That's right.
Arlena is going to get them $50 off the courses. I have a really sweet course, which is a series. Really, it's 3 courses for anyone who wants to get started on the journey of sobriety. That's in English. I have one in Spanish as well. The code awesome. Arlena will give them some of the discount. mybadassrecovery.com. And there you can also download a basic masterclass for free, which is an hour presentation to give you some initial mind shifts to kind of get you started with your eyes or your soul eyes in the right direction also. And that's also where they can fill out a form for a 30-minute discovery call. That's a clarity call that there's no cost to it. And we can start either share resources that I can give to them or potentially start a relationship where we walk together, which is what I love the most. I'm so honored.
That's beautiful. So helpful.
Yes. So thank you. Thank you for asking that and for offering that
to
your audience. Yeah.
People that do not have the Spanish speaking vocabulary to help somebody in that way. And we're all in this to help. Like, I know that your heart is pure and you're in it to help people. So am I. And for those that are listening, help is available. All you have to do is reach out to us. We're here to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. And don't ever, I just want to say, when I heard podcasts, and of course I dove hard into Quitlet and podcast, everything I could get my head around, everything that I could bring into my field. And so many times I would hear conversations with women that felt so far away from me. I was like, dude, I can barely fucking get dressed, and that, to me, is always something I love mentioning. We remember, it doesn't matter, 30 years. I don't even know. I think I'm 7 back from the relapse. Because we're committed to, always being present back in our day one. It's so wonderful. Wherever you are on the journey, that's exactly the place to reach out and get help. Don't ever wait until you have that, I drove my son drunk and almost killed us moment. Whatever, don't ever wait. It's hard, but very simple. I need help.
Yeah.
That's it.
Seize the day.
We're happy to meet you wherever you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Your life is waiting. Your life is waiting.
Let's design that life.
Let it intimidate you. Let it give you hope.
That's right.
That is available.
Absolutely.
So that's why I love what you do. And I love the conversations and the people you bring into the space, babe, because you give us such a whole gamut of humans that have gone through this journey in their own way. There's no right or wrong or good or bad. It's just, whatever works and gets you to the other side where you can actually live your life and not just survive. That's I think what you and I share, that we really hope people can get to access like we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, that was beautiful. I don't think we can end it any better than that. So thank you so much for spending time with me today and sharing all your wisdom. And I'll leave links to everything in the show notes. And I can't wait to do this again.
Beautiful. I can't wait to have you on my podcast. Thank you, babe. Thank you. And thank you to all the listeners. And we'll see you soon.
See you
Besitos.
soon.
Gracias. Besos, besos. Bye.